The emergency room doctor stared at my MRI results with concern etched across his face. "Sophia, this brain hemorrhage is severe. What exactly happened to cause this kind of trauma?" I touched the swollen bruise covering half my forehead, remembering the wooden chair leg cracking against my skull just hours earlier. My father Gary sat in the corner, arms crossed, his voice cutting through the sterile air like a knife. "She's always been clumsy, doctor, probably tripped over her own feet again." But I knew the truth, and soon everyone else would too. "I need to take you back to earlier that day, when my life changed forever at what was supposed to be a celebration." The suburban Dallas neighborhood where I grew up looked picture perfect from the outside, with its manicured lawns and white picket fences. But inside our modest two-story home, darkness lurked behind every family gathering. The backyard barbecue had been my idea. After years of working as an accountant and finally feeling stable in my career, I wanted to share some wonderful news with my family. Marcus, my boyfriend of 2 years, had proposed the week before, and I was bursting with excitement to tell everyone. The engagement ring felt heavy on my finger as I arranged potato salad and coleslaw on the picnic table. My father Gary stood by the grill beer bottle, already half empty, despite it being only 1 o'clock in the afternoon. At 55 years old, his construction foreman job had weathered his face and hands, but alcohol had weathered his soul. His bloodshot eyes tracked my every movement with the predatory focus I remembered from childhood. "Dad, can you gather everyone around Marcus, and I have some news to share?" I called out, trying to keep my voice light and cheerful. My mother Linda emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of hamburger buns, her perpetually worried expression deepening. At 52, she had perfected the art of managing family tension, always smoothing over rough edges before they could develop into full-blown confrontations. Her graying blonde hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail she had worn for decades. My younger brother Tommy sat on the back porch steps, scrolling through his phone with the detached air of a 23-year-old who would rather be anywhere else. He barely looked up when I mentioned the announcement. Marcus squeezed my hand supportively as we stood together near the flower bed Linda meticulously maintained. His warm brown eyes radiated the kindness that had first attracted me to him 2 years earlier when we met at a coffee shop near the elementary school where he taught 4th grade. Everyone Marcus asked me to marry him last week, and I said yes. I announced, holding up my left hand to show the simple but beautiful solitaire diamond ring. The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Linda dropped the tray of buns, her face cycling through surprise, joy, and terror in rapid succession. Tommy actually looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised, but Gary's reaction chilled my blood. His face turned an alarming shade of red, and he slammed his beer bottle down on the picnic table with enough force to make the condiment bottles jump. "You think you're better than this family now, don't you, Sophia?" "What do you mean, Dad? This is good news. Marcus is wonderful, and we love each other." I replied, confusion mixing with growing dread. "The college girl thinks she's too good for her raising." Gary snarled his words, already slurring slightly. "Getting married to some fancy teacher boy while the rest of us bust our backs for a living." Marcus stepped forward protectively. "Mr. Johnson, I respect Sophia tremendously, and I would never ask her to choose between me and her family. "Nobody asked you, boy." Gary spat, his voice gaining volume and venom. "This is between me and my daughter, who thinks her college degree makes her special." The familiar pattern was emerging, the same one that had terrorized my childhood. Gary would find some perceived slight or challenge to his authority, work himself into a rage, and then explode with devastating consequences. But I was 28 years old now, not 8. I had my own life, my own career, my own future planned out. "Dad, please don't do this. This is supposed to be a happy day," I pleaded, but I could see the darkness overtaking his features. "Happy? You want to abandon your family and run off with this stranger, and I'm supposed to be happy." Gary's voice rose to a shout. "After everything we sacrificed for you, ungrateful little princess." Linda rushed forward, hands fluttering nervously. "Gary, honey, let's just celebrate Sophia's good news. Marcus seems like a nice young man." "Don't you start defending her, Linda. She's been planning this behind our backs, probably laughing at us poor folks who never went to college." The accusations stung because they were so completely unfounded. I had never looked down on my family's blue-collar background. If anything, I had worked twice as hard to succeed because I wanted to make them proud. But Gary's twisted perception of reality never aligned with actual facts. "That's not true, Dad. I love this family, but I also love Marcus. Getting married doesn't mean I'm abandoning anyone." "Like hell it doesn't," Gary roared, grabbing the nearest object within reach. The folding lawn chair weighed about 15 pounds and had metal hinges that could seriously injure someone. When Gary lifted it above his head, time seemed to slow down. I saw Linda's mouth open in a silent scream. Tommy jumped to his feet. Marcus lunged forward to intervene. But Gary was faster. The chair connected with the left side of my forehead with a sickening crack that echoed across the backyard. Pain exploded through my skull like nothing I had ever experienced. The world tilted sideways as I crumpled to the ground, my vision filling with dancing stars and encroaching darkness. Blood poured down my face, soaking into the grass beneath my head. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Linda screaming, "What have you done? What have you done, c'est-tu?" Gary stood over me, chest heaving, the chair still gripped in his hands. For a moment, his face showed a flicker of shock at what he had accomplished, but then his features hardened back into defiance. "She fell down," he announced to nobody in particular. "Clumsy girl tripped over her own feet." Marcus was on his knees beside me, frantically checking my pulse and trying to stop the bleeding with napkins from the picnic table. "Sophia, can you hear me? Stay with me, sweetheart." My head felt like it was splitting open from the inside. Every heartbeat sent fresh waves of agony through my skull. But worse than the physical pain was the crushing realization that my father had just tried to seriously hurt me over an engagement announcement. Linda's damage control mode kicked in immediately. "We need to get her to the hospital, but Gary, you can't come looking like this. Go inside and sober up. Change your shirt." "I'm calling 911, Marcus declared, pulling out his phone. "No," Linda snatched the phone away from him. "We'll drive her ourselves. It'll be faster." Even through my hazy consciousness, I understood what was happening. Linda was already constructing the story that would protect Gary from consequences. The same pattern that had played out countless times throughout my childhood, just with higher stakes this time. Tommy finally spoke up. "Mom-Dad just threw a chair at Sophia's head. She needs an ambulance." She fell, Tommy. Everyone saw her fall. Linda insisted with desperate conviction. The 20-minute drive to Dallas Presbyterian Hospital passed in a blur of mounting nausea and throbbing pain. Linda coached me the entire way about what to tell the medical staff. "You were walking backward, showing off your ring, and you tripped over the patio stones, hit your head on the concrete edge. Accident." But when we arrived at the emergency department and Dr. Martinez began his examination, I realized that some truths cannot be hidden or explained away. Dr. Martinez was a soft-spoken man in his early 40s with graying temples and kind eyes that missed nothing. As he gently probed the injury on my forehead, his expression grew increasingly concerned. "Sophia, this injury pattern is quite unusual for a simple fall. The impact site suggests a curved object struck you with significant force." My father had arrived separately and now sat in the corner chair, having changed into a clean shirt and chewed enough breath mints to mask the alcohol smell. His performance as the worried father was Academy Award worthy. "Doctor, my daughter has always been accident-prone. Even as a little girl, she was constantly bumping into things, falling down. Just last month, she walked straight into a glass door." That was a lie, but Dr. Martinez didn't know that. What he did know was medical evidence, and the evidence was telling a very different story than Gary's carefully crafted narrative. "I'm going to order a CT scan and MRI to check for internal bleeding or swelling. Head injuries can be deceivingly serious." As they wheeled me away for the scans, I caught Dr. Martinez giving my father a long, searching look. Something in that look gave me the first glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see through Gary's lies. The CT scan results came back first, and Dr. Martinez's expression grew grave as he studied the images on his computer screen. I lay on the examination table, still feeling dizzy and nauseous, while my family clustered around, pretending to be concerned. "Sophia, I need to be direct with you. The scan shows bleeding in your brain. We call it a subdural hematoma. This is a very serious condition that requires immediate attention and monitoring." Gary's face went pale, but he maintained his composure. "How serious, doctor?" "Serious enough that I'm admitting her for observation and bringing in a neurologist. I'm also requesting that our social workers speak with Sophia about how this happened." "Social worker?" Linda's voice pitched higher with anxiety. "Why would we need a social worker? It was just an accident." Before Dr. Martinez could answer, a woman in her 30s with short auburn hair and a warm but professional demeanor entered the room. "Hello, I'm Janet Walsh, the hospital social worker. I understand Sophia had a head injury today." Janet's presence changed the entire atmosphere in the room. Gary straightened up, putting on his most charming smile. Linda began wringing her hands. Even Tommy looked uncomfortable. "Janet, I'd like to speak with Sophia privately for a few minutes, if that's okay with everyone," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "That's not necessary," Gary interjected quickly. "We're her family. We don't keep secrets from each other." Janet stepped forward smoothly. "Actually, it's standard protocol for head trauma cases. Sophia, are you comfortable speaking with Dr. Martinez and me alone?" This was my moment. I could continue the lie Linda had constructed, or I could finally tell the truth about what really happened. My head was pounding, my vision still slightly blurry, but my mind was crystal clear about one thing I was tired of protecting: a man who had just given me a brain hemorrhage. "Yes, I'd like that," I said quietly. Gary's jaw tightened. "Sophia, remember what we talked about in the car." "Mr. Johnson, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside now," Janet said with polite firmness. After my family reluctantly filed out, Janet pulled a chair close to my bed. "Sophia, I want you to know that anything you tell us is confidential unless you're in immediate danger. Can you walk me through exactly what happened today?" The words came tumbling out like water through a broken dam. I told them about the engagement announcement, Gary's explosive reaction, the chair connecting with my skull. Dr. Martinez took notes while Janet listened intently. "Has your father ever hurt you before?" Janet asked gently. That question opened floodgates I had kept sealed for years. I told them about the clumsiness that had plagued me since childhood, the broken ribs when I was 22 that Gary claimed happened when I fell down the basement stairs, the concussion at 25 from walking into a door during a family argument, the second-degree burn on my hand at 26 from a kitchen accident that occurred right after I told Gary I was moving into my own apartment. Janet excused herself and returned with a thick folder. "Sophia, I pulled your medical records from our system. You've been treated here 3 times in the past 5 years for injuries that were classified as accidents." She opened the folder and showed me the documentation. Each visit included Gary's detailed explanations for my clumsiness. Each time, medical staff had accepted his stories without question. But seeing the pattern laid out in black and white was devastating. "I never realized," I whispered. "I mean, I knew something was wrong, but seeing it all together like this." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Sophia, the injury you sustained today could have killed you. If the bleeding increases, you could suffer permanent brain damage or worse." Outside in the hallway, I could hear my family arguing in hushed voices. Linda was pleading with someone to think about the consequences for everyone. Gary's voice carried that edge of barely controlled violence that I knew all too well. "There's something else," Janet said quietly. "By law, we're required to report suspected domestic violence to the police. That process has already begun." Fear shot through me like electricity. "What does that mean?" "It means a detective will want to speak with you about today's incident and potentially the previous injuries. You'll have legal options available to you." The room door burst open before Janet could continue. Gary strode in, his face flushed with anger. "We're taking Sophia home now. She needs rest, not interrogation." "Mr. Johnson, Sophia is being admitted overnight for observation," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "The head injury is too serious for her to go home." "I'm her father. I know what's best for my daughter." "Actually, Sophia is 28 years old. She makes her own medical decisions," Janet interjected smoothly. Linda appeared behind Gary, wringing her hands and looking like she might collapse. "Sophia, honey, please don't make this into something bigger than it needs to be. Think about Tommy's future. Think about our reputation in the neighborhood." My mother's words hit like physical blows. Even faced with evidence that her husband had given their daughter a brain hemorrhage, her primary concern was maintaining appearances and protecting the family image. Nemons, Mrs. Johnson, your daughter, has suffered a traumatic brain injury, Dr. Martinez said with obvious frustration. Her health and safety should be the only priorities right now. Just then, Marcus burst through the door, his face etched with worry and fury. He had obviously been trying to get past hospital security. Sophia, I've been in the parking lot for an hour. They wouldn't let me up because I'm not family. Seeing Marcus brought tears to my eyes. Here was someone who actually cared about my well-being without calculating the social or legal consequences. Marcus, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault, I sobbed. No, sweetheart, this is absolutely not your fault, he said fiercely, taking my hand. What kind of father does this to his own child? Gary stepped toward Marcus aggressively. Watch your mouth, boy. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Marcus replied, standing his ground. I've been documenting Sophia's mysterious injuries for months, thinking she was hiding something else entirely. The room fell silent. Even Gary looked stunned by this revelation. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Janet and Dr. Martinez a series of photos. This bruise on her shoulder from 3 months ago. These finger marks on her wrist from last month. This black eye she claimed came from a cabinet door. I thought maybe she had a medical condition or was involved in something dangerous. Janet studied the photos with growing concern. Sophia, were all of these injuries caused by your father? Looking at the photographic evidence Marcus had carefully preserved, the full scope of Gary's abuse became undeniable. Not just the dramatic chair incident, but a systematic pattern of violence that had been hidden behind a facade of family normalcy. Yes, I whispered, all of them. Gary's face went from red to purple with rage. You ungrateful little witch. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. Dr. Martinez stood up and moved between Gary and my hospital bed. Mr. Johnson, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the hospital immediately. Security will escort you out. You can't kick me out. This is my daughter. Actually, we can, and we are, Janet said, pressing the call button for security. Sophia is an adult patient who has requested that you not be present during her treatment. As security officers arrived to escort Gary from the room, he turned back with eyes full of venom. Sophia, if you go through with this, you'll destroy this entire family. Is that really what you want? But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of his threats. Lying in that hospital bed with a brain hemorrhage, surrounded by people who actually wanted to protect me, I realized that some things are more important than keeping family secrets. I want to tell the truth, I said clearly. I want to talk to the police. Detective Sarah Brooks arrived at the hospital the next morning, carrying a weathered leather portfolio and an expression that suggested she had seen too much human cruelty in her 15-year career. She was a woman in her early 40s with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. I had spent a restless night in the hospital bed, monitored constantly for signs of increasing brain pressure. The neurologist had been cautiously optimistic that surgery wouldn't be necessary, but warned that my recovery would be long and uncertain. Marcus had spent the night in the uncomfortable visitor chair, refusing to leave despite my protests that he should go home and rest. Janet had arranged for him to stay citing his role as my support person and emergency contact. Good morning, Sophia. I'm Detective Brooks. I understand you're ready to talk about what happened yesterday. My mouth felt dry as sandpaper. Speaking to police felt like crossing a bridge I could never uncross. Once I told the official truth, there would be no taking it back. Yes, but I'm scared about what this means for my family. Detective Brooks pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the bedside table. I understand this is difficult, but I want you to know that what happened to you is a serious crime. Assault with a deadly weapon resulting in bodily injury is a felony in Texas. She began with basic questions about my relationship with Gary, my living situation, and the events leading up to yesterday's attack. I walked her through the engagement announcement and Gary's explosive reaction. Sophia, this injury pattern suggests your father swung that chair with considerable force. In your estimation, was he trying to hurt you seriously? The question forced me to confront something I had been avoiding. In that moment when the chair was above Gary's head, his face had shown pure rage. Not the heat of passion or momentary anger, but calculated violence. Yes, I think he wanted to hurt me, really hurt me. Detective Brooks made notes in her portfolio. Has he ever made threats about what would happen if you defied him or made choices he disagreed with? The threats came flooding back. Gary had always been explicit about the consequences of crossing him. Respect in this house is earned through fear, he used to tell Tommy and me. Step out of line and you'll learn why I'm the man of this family. After 2 hours of detailed questioning, Detective Brooks closed her portfolio with a satisfied expression. Sophia, based on your testimony and the medical evidence, I have enough to arrest your father on multiple charges. But I want to share something with you first. She pulled out another folder, this one marked with official police department seals. I ran a background check on Gary Johnson last night. He has a record. My heart stopped. What kind of record? Domestic violence charges from his first marriage 12 years ago. 3 separate incidents involving his ex-wife Emma. The charges were ultimately dropped when Emma stopped cooperating with prosecutors. The room began spinning around me. Gary had been married before my mother. He had abused another woman. I never knew he was married before, Mom, I whispered. Emma Johnson filed multiple police reports between 2011 and 2013. Hospital visits for suspicious injuries, temporary restraining orders that she later canceled. The pattern is identical to what you've described. Marcus squeezed my hand tightly. Sophia, you're not the first person he's done this to. Detective Brooks continued. Emma eventually disappeared from the area in late 2013. The case files show she left suddenly abandoning all her possessions and contact with family members. At the time, it was classified as a domestic violence victim fleeing an abusive situation. What happened to her? That's what I intend to find out. But first, I need to ask if you know anything about your half-sister, Crystal. The word half-sister hit me like a physical blow. I had a sister I never knew existed. Emma had a daughter from a previous relationship. Crystal was about 16 when Emma disappeared. She was placed in foster care after reporting that Gary had been abusing her, too. The scope of Gary's destruction was becoming clear. Not just my mother and me, but an entire previous family that he had terrorized and scattered. Where is Crystal now? She's 35 Lives in Austin, works as a victim advocate. And Sophia, she wants to talk to you. Before I could process this information fully, Linda appeared in the doorway, looking haggard and desperate. She had clearly been crying all night, and her usually perfect appearance was disheveled. "Sophia, honey, can we talk privately?" Detective Brooks looked to me for guidance. I nodded reluctantly. After Detective Brooks and Marcus stepped outside, Linda collapsed into the visitor chair with the weight of someone carrying an impossible burden. "Sweetheart, I know you're angry and hurt, but if you press charges against your father, it will destroy everything we've built together." "Mom, he gave me a brain hemorrhage." "I know, and I'm not excusing that. But think about Tommy. Think about our house, our life, our community standing. Gary made a mistake, but people make mistakes." Linda's ability to minimize attempted murder as a mistake revealed just how deeply she had internalized years of abuse. In her mind, maintaining family stability was worth any amount of personal suffering. "This isn't the first time, Mom. Detective Brooks showed me Gary's record from his previous marriage." Linda's face went completely white. "What record?" I told her about Emma and Crystal, watching my mother's world crumble in real time. She had genuinely believed she was Gary's first wife, his second chance at building a loving family. He told me Emma died in a car accident. He said Crystal was traumatized by losing her mother, and that's why she acted out and had to be placed in foster care. More lies, more manipulation. Gary had constructed elaborate false narratives to hide his history of violence and abandonment. "Mom, don't you see he's done this before? He'll do it again, maybe next time he kills someone." Linda stared at her hands for a long moment. "What happens to me if Gary goes to prison?" For the first time, I saw past my mother's enabling behavior to the terrified woman underneath. She had spent 15 years financially and emotionally dependent on a man who had systematically isolated her from friends and family. At 52, she had no job skills, no savings of her own, and no plan for independence. "We'll figure it out, Mom, but I can't protect him anymore. I almost died yesterday." Linda nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know you're right, but I'm so scared, Sophia." "I'm scared too, but I'm more scared of what happens if we do nothing." Detective Brooks returned with paperwork and a determined expression. "Sophia, I have a warrant for your father's arrest, but there's something else. I spoke with Crystal this morning, and she has information that could be crucial to this case." "What kind of information?" "She kept detailed journals documenting the abuse she and Emma suffered. Names, dates, photographs, medical records. She's been waiting for years for someone to finally listen." The idea that my unknown half-sister had been carrying this burden alone for over a decade was heartbreaking, but it also meant that Gary's reign of terror might finally be coming to an end. "I want to meet her," I said firmly. "And Detective Brooks, I want to press full charges against my father." Linda sobbed quietly in her chair, but she didn't try to talk me out of my decision. Perhaps she was finally ready to stop protecting the man who had destroyed so many lives. "There's one more thing," Detective Brooks added. "We arrested Gary this morning at his job site. During the arrest, his employer mentioned some irregularities with his veterans' benefits paperwork. It seems your father has been claiming disability payments for PTSD from military service." Marcus frowned. "Is that a problem?" "Only if he never actually served in the military, which according to our initial records check, he didn't." Gary's house of lies was collapsing faster than anyone could have predicted. Not only was he facing assault charges, but potential federal fraud charges as well. As Detective Brooks left to continue her investigation, I realized that yesterday's chair to my head had been the catalyst for exposing decades of hidden abuse and deception. It was going to be a long, difficult journey, but for the first time in years, I felt like justice might actually be possible. 3 days later, I sat in a small coffee shop in downtown Dallas, nervously fidgeting with my engagement ring while waiting to meet the sister I never knew existed. The doctors had cleared me for short outings as long as Marcus accompanied me, though I still experienced dizziness and headaches from the brain injury. Crystal walked through the door at exactly 2 o'clock, and I recognized her immediately despite never having seen her before. She had Gary's jawline and my mother's bone structure, but her eyes held a wariness that spoke of hard-won survival skills. She was taller than me, probably 5'8", with dark brown hair cut in a practical, shoulder-length style. Her clothing was professional, but understated navy slacks, white blouse, minimal jewelry. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who had learned not to draw unwanted attention. "Sophia," she asked, tentatively approaching my corner table. "Crystal, thank you for coming." We embraced awkwardly, two strangers bound by shared trauma. Marcus had positioned himself at a nearby table to give us privacy while still providing security. Crystal sat down across from me, her hands shaking slightly as she unwrapped a large manila envelope. "I've been carrying these for 22 years, waiting for someone who would believe me." Inside the envelope were photograph after photograph, documenting years of abuse. Pictures of bruises, broken bones, black eyes, medical records from emergency room visits, and most damning of all, page after page of handwritten journal entries in a teenage girl's careful script. "I started keeping records when I was 14, Crystal explained. My school counselor suggested it might help if I ever felt safe enough to report what was happening at home. The journals painted a horrifying picture of Gary's escalating violence toward both Emma and Crystal. What started as verbal abuse and intimidation had progressed to systematic physical assault and psychological torture. Emma tried to leave him multiple times. Crystal continued, her voice steady but quiet. But Gary always found ways to force us to come back. He'd threaten to hurt me if she left. He'd sabotage her job interviews. He convinced her that no one would believe her if she reported him. Detective Brooks said Emma died in a car accident. Crystal's expression hardened. That's what Gary told everyone, including the police. But I was there the night before she died, Sophia. Gary had beaten her worse than ever before. She was planning to take me and disappear permanently the next morning. My blood ran cold. "You think Gary killed her?" "I think Emma's car accident was very convenient timing for Gary. She was going to expose everything he had done to us. She had finally gathered enough evidence to destroy him, and then suddenly she's dead." Crystal showed me copies of police reports from Emma's accident. A single car crash on a rural highway at 2 in the morning. Emma had allegedly fallen asleep at the wheel and struck a tree at high speed. The weird thing is, Emma was the most careful driver I knew. She never drove when she was tired, always took back roads to avoid confrontation. But that night, she was supposedly on a highway she never used at a time she would never be driving. Did you tell the police your suspicions? I was 16 and traumatized. Gary told social services that I was a troubled teen acting out because of my mother's death. Every adult I talked to dismissed my concerns as grief-induced paranoia. The manipulation was breathtakingly sophisticated. Gary had positioned himself as the grieving widower, struggling to care for a difficult stepdaughter. When Crystal's accusations became too persistent, he had her removed from his home and placed in foster care. But you kept the evidence all these years. Every piece. I always knew someday I'd need it. Crystal leaned forward intently. Sophia Gary is going to try to destroy you in court. He'll claim you're mentally unstable, vindictive, trying to extort money from the family. He's probably already started building that narrative. I thought about Gary's performance at the hospital, his immediate framing of my injury as clumsiness rather than assault. What can I do? Tell the truth consistently and completely. Don't let his lawyers intimidate you into backing down. Crystal paused. And there's something else. I think Gary has been defrauding the government for years. She pulled out additional documents. These focused on Gary's financial history. Bank statements, property records, benefit payment documentation. Emma discovered that Gary was collecting disability payments by claiming PTSD from military service. But Gary never served in the military, Sophia. He bought fake discharge papers from someone who forges veteran documents. The scope of Gary's criminal activity was staggering. Not just domestic violence, but fraud that had been ongoing for over a decade. How much money are we talking about? Based on these records, probably close to $200,000 over the years. That's federal fraud, which means federal prison time if he's convicted. Crystal had spent years building an airtight case against Gary, collecting evidence piece by piece, while working as a victim advocate and learning the legal system from the inside. Her dedication was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Because I needed someone else to corroborate the pattern. One adult making accusations against Gary was easy for him to discredit. But two victims from different time periods backed up by medical evidence and financial records that's much harder to dismiss. We spent 3 hours going through Crystal's evidence. By the end, I understood that yesterday's chair attack hadn't been an isolated incident of lost temper, but the latest escalation in a decades-long pattern of systematic abuse and manipulation. Crystal, I'm sorry you went through all of this alone. I wasn't completely alone, she said with a small smile. Emma's memory kept me going, and knowing that Gary was probably still hurting people motivated me to keep gathering evidence. What happens now? Now we make sure Gary finally faces consequences for everything he's done. To Emma, to me, to you probably, to your mother too. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Crystal handed me one final document. A victim impact statement she had written but never submitted, detailing the lifelong effects of Gary's abuse on her mental health relationships and ability to trust others. You might want to write one of these too, she said gently. It helps the court understand that his actions have consequences beyond just physical injuries. Driving home with Marcus, I felt overwhelmed by the weight of evidence against my father. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope that justice might actually be possible. Are you okay? Marcus asked, glancing at me with concern. I think so. It's just surreal learning that everything I thought I knew about my family was built on lies. Sophia, you don't have to carry Gary's secrets anymore. You have people who believe you now, people who want to help. That evening, I began writing my own victim impact statement, documenting 28 years of living in fear of my father's unpredictable violence. It was painful work, but also liberating to finally put the truth into words that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. For the first time since the chair had connected with my skull, I began to believe that my nightmare might finally be coming to an end. 2 weeks after meeting Crystal, I was sitting in prosecutor Diana Chen's office, learning just how deep Gary's criminal activity extended. Diana was a sharp woman in her late 30s who specialized in domestic violence cases, with a reputation for thorough preparation and aggressive prosecution. Sophia, what started as an assault case has expanded significantly. Diana explained, spreading documents across her conference table. Federal agents are now involved because of the Veterans Benefits fraud. Agent Michael Torres from the Department of Veterans Affairs had joined our meeting along with Detective Brooks and Janet Walsh, who had become my advocate throughout the legal process. Your father has been collecting disability payments for PTSD related to combat service in Afghanistan, Agent Torres explained. The problem is military records show Gary Johnson never deployed anywhere, never saw combat, and was actually discharged from basic training for disciplinary issues. The documents Agent Torres showed me revealed the stunning scope of Gary's deception: forged military records, fake medical evaluations, fraudulent disability claims spanning 15 years. He had stolen nearly $300,000 from programs designed to help genuine combat veterans. How did he get away with this for so long? Marcus asked. He was careful and patient, Agent Torres replied. Started with small claims, built a paper trail over years, used multiple addresses and social security variations. Very sophisticated operation. Diana Chen leaned forward. There's more, Sophia. The fraud investigation has uncovered financial irregularities that connect to your father's construction business. It turned out Gary had been operating shell companies to hide assets and launder the fraudulent benefits payments. Money would come in as disability payments get funneled through fake construction contracts and emerge as legitimate business income. Your family home, your father's truck, even some of your college tuition was paid for with stolen money, Diana explained gently. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Even my education had been financed through Gary's crimes. I felt contaminated by association with his corruption. What does this mean for my mother? Linda is currently being investigated as a potential accomplice, but we believe she was unaware of the fraud scheme, Agent Torres said. However, she could face charges for failing to report suspected domestic violence. My mother had been walking around in a daze since Gary's arrest, staying with her sister Carol, and struggling to comprehend how her entire life had been built on criminal activity. The house was under federal seizure, leaving Linda with nothing except the clothes she had taken to Carol's place. Detective Brooks opened another folder. Sophia, there's something else we need to discuss. The investigation into Emma's death has been reopened. My stomach dropped. What have you found? Crystal's journals contain detailed accounts of Gary's threats against Emma in the weeks before her death. Accidents happen to women who don't know their place, was one direct quote she recorded. But how can you prove anything after 11 years? We're re-examining the physical evidence from the crash scene. Modern forensic techniques might reveal details that were missed during the original investigation. Agent Torres pulled out photographs of Emma's wrecked car. Even to my untrained eye, the damage looked suspicious. The vehicle had struck the tree head-on with tremendous force, but there were no skid marks indicating Emma had tried to brake or swerve. Either Emma fell asleep instantaneously while driving, or someone else was controlling the vehicle when it crashed. Detective Brooks explained, "You think Gary tampered with her car. We think Gary is capable of anything necessary to protect his secrets. Emma was about to expose years of domestic violence and fraud. Her death was very convenient for him." The meeting continued for 3 hours, revealing layer after layer of Gary's criminal enterprise. By the end, I understood that my father wasn't just an abusive man with anger issues, but a calculating sociopath who had built an entire life around deception and violence. "When does the trial start?" I asked as we prepared to leave. "Gary's attorney is pushing for a plea bargain to avoid federal charges," Diana replied. "But we're not interested in deals. He's going to face full prosecution on every count." Walking out of the prosecutor's office, I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the legal proceedings ahead. But I also felt validated in a way I never had before. Gary's crimes were finally being taken seriously by people with the power to hold him accountable. Marcus drove me to my first therapy appointment with Dr. Jennifer Walsh-Janet's sister, who specialized in trauma recovery for domestic violence survivors. The brain injury had complicated my emotional healing, causing memory issues and mood swings that made processing the abuse even more difficult. "Sophia, you're dealing with both psychological trauma and physical brain injury," Dr. Walsh explained during our session. "Recovery is going to take time and patience with yourself." That evening, Linda came to Marcus's apartment, where I had been staying since leaving the hospital. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 2 weeks, her face gaunt and her usual composed demeanor completely shattered. "Sophia, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express." She began, tears already flowing. "I failed to protect you from Gary, and I failed to see the truth about who he really was. Mom, you were a victim too. That doesn't excuse my choices. I put maintaining our family image above your safety. I taught you to normalize abuse and accept unacceptable behavior." Linda pulled out a letter she had written to the court, formally supporting my decision to press charges and detailing her own experiences with Gary's controlling behavior. "I'm going to testify against him, Sophia. I should have done it years ago." "Are you sure the prosecutor said you might face charges yourself?" "I'd rather face legal consequences than continue living with the knowledge that I enabled Gary's crimes." That night, I received a phone call that changed everything. Detective Brooks sounded excited as she delivered the news. "Sophia, we got him. Gary violated his restraining order by trying to contact you through a third party. He's back in custody, and this time there's no bail." "What did he do?" "He convinced a coworker to call Marcus's school and leave threatening messages. The calls were traced back to Gary's construction site. He's looking at additional charges for witness intimidation." Gary's desperation was showing. Faced with overwhelming evidence of decades of criminal activity, He was making increasingly reckless decisions that only strengthened the case against him. As I hung up the phone, Marcus wrapped his arms around me protectively. "It's almost over, sweetheart. He can't hurt you anymore." But even as Gary's legal troubles mounted, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Soon I would have to face him in court and tell the world exactly what kind of man my father really was. 6 months after the chair attack, I sat in the witness box of District Court Judge Patricia Williams, facing a packed courtroom and the most important testimony of my life. My brain injury symptoms had improved significantly with treatment, but I still experienced occasional dizziness and memory lapses that made the pressure even more intense. Gary sat at the defense table in an Orange County jail uniform, having been denied bail due to flight risk concerns. His new court-appointed attorney, David Murphy, was a young public defender who looked overwhelmed by the scope of charges his client faced. Prosecutor Diana Chen had spent months building an airtight case that painted Gary as a serial abuser and sophisticated criminal who had terrorized multiple families while defrauding taxpayers for over a decade. "Sophia, please tell the jury what happened on the afternoon of June 15th. Diana prompted gently. I took a deep breath and began recounting the engagement announcement that had triggered Gary's explosive violence. The courtroom was completely silent as I described the chair connecting with my skull and the desperate cover-up attempt that followed. "Did your father express remorse for injuring you?" "No. Even in the ambulance, he insisted I had fallen on my own. He never acknowledged hitting me with the chair." David Murphy's cross-examination was predictably aggressive, but Diana had prepared me well for his tactics. "Ms. Johnson, isn't it true that you've harbored resentment toward your father for years because he didn't support your college ambitions?" "Mr. Murphy, my resentment is about being physically abused, not about college." "You admit you've been planning to move away from your family. Isn't this assault allegation a convenient way to justify abandoning your responsibilities to your parents?" I looked directly at the jury as I answered. "My only responsibility is to tell the truth about what Gary Johnson did to me and my family." Crystal's testimony was even more powerful than mine. She presented 22 years of meticulously documented evidence with the expertise of someone who had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment. "Why did you keep such detailed records?" Diana asked. "Because I knew Gary would eventually hurt someone else, and I wanted to be ready to help when that happened." Crystal's journals were entered into evidence, providing a chilling chronicle of escalating abuse that established Gary's pattern of behavior long before I was born. The jury looked visibly shaken as she read excerpts describing Emma's final weeks alive. Dr. Martinez testified about my brain injury with scientific precision that made Gary's clumsiness explanation sound absurd. The medical evidence was devastating to the defense. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, could this injury have been caused by a simple fall?" "Absolutely not. The force required to cause this type of brain hemorrhage indicates a deliberate assault with a heavy object." Linda's testimony was perhaps the most emotionally difficult to watch. My mother had lost 30 pounds since Gary's arrest and looked frail as she recounted years of subtle psychological manipulation and control. "Mrs. Johnson, why didn't you report your husband's abuse of Sophia sooner?" "Because Gary convinced me that protecting the family reputation was more important than protecting my daughter. I will regret that decision for the rest of my life. Agent Torres presented the federal fraud evidence with bureaucratic thoroughness that made Gary's crimes seem even more calculated and deliberate. $300,000 in stolen benefits, fake military records, elaborate money laundering schemes. Agent Torres, how sophisticated was this fraud operation? Mr. Johnson created an entire false identity as a combat veteran, complete with forged medical records and fabricated witness statements. This level of deception required years of planning and execution. Tommy's testimony surprised everyone, including me. My younger brother revealed that he had been secretly recording Gary's violent outbursts for months before the chair incident, hoping to gather evidence that might protect our family. Tommy, why didn't you share these recordings with your sister or mother? Because Dad threatened to kill me if I ever told anyone about his behavior. I was waiting for someone else to speak up first. The audio recordings were played for the jury, capturing Gary's explosive rages and explicit threats against family members. His voice filled the courtroom with venomous promises of violence that made several jurors visibly uncomfortable. As the prosecution rested its case, I felt confident that justice would be served. The evidence was overwhelming, the witness testimony consistent and credible, the physical proof undeniable. But David Murphy had one final strategy for defending his client. Your Honor, my client wishes to testify in his own defense. Diana Chen objected immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense hasn't indicated any intention to call witnesses. Mr. Murphy, are you certain your client understands the risks of testifying? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Johnson insists on telling his side of the story. I watched in shock as Gary was sworn in and took the witness stand. This was a man who had spent his entire life manipulating others through lies and intimidation, now facing a jury that had already heard overwhelming evidence of his guilt. David Murphy began with softball questions designed to humanize Gary and establish him as a devoted father who had been misunderstood. Mr. Johnson, how would you describe your relationship with your daughter Sophia? I love my daughter very much. Everything I did was to protect her and help her become a responsible adult. Did you intentionally assault Sophia with a chair on June 15th? Absolutely not. Sophia has always been clumsy and accident-prone. She tripped and fell, hitting her head on the patio stones. Gary's performance was masterful, portraying himself as a misunderstood father whose family had turned against him out of greed and resentment. But Diana Chen was ready for him. Mr. Johnson, you testified that you love your daughter very much. Is that why you gave her a brain hemorrhage? Objection, David Murphy called out. Sustained, rephrased the question, counselor. Mr. Johnson, if Sophia's injury was accidental, why did you immediately begin coaching her to lie to medical personnel? Gary's composure began cracking under Diana's relentless questioning. His answers became defensive, then angry, then increasingly erratic. Mr. Johnson, are you a military veteran? Yes, I served my country with honor. Where did you serve specifically? Afghanistan, combat operations. I saw things that no man should have to see. Diana presented the military records showing Gary's discharge from basic training for disciplinary issues. Mr. Johnson, these official records indicate you never completed basic training, let alone deployed to Afghanistan. Were you lying about your military service? Gary's face turned red as his carefully constructed lies collapsed in real time. Those records are wrong. I served. I earned those benefits. Mr. Johnson, you've collected nearly $300,000 in fraudulent disability payments. How do you justify stealing from genuine combat veterans? I didn't steal anything. Those payments were rightfully mine. Diana continued systematically destroying Gary's credibility, forcing him to confront each piece of evidence while his temper grew more volatile. Mr. Johnson, did you kill Emma Patterson? Objection. That's not relevant to these charges. Your Honor, the defendant opened this door by claiming to be a loving family man. Overruled. The witness will answer. Gary stared at Diana with pure hatred. Emma died in a car accident. I had nothing to do with it. Mr. Johnson, Emma was planning to expose your abuse and fraud before her convenient death, wasn't she? I don't know what you're talking about. You threatened Emma repeatedly in the weeks before her death. Crystal documented those threats in detail. Gary's control finally snapped completely. He lunged forward in the witness chair, screaming at Diana with uncontrolled rage. That little witch Crystal deserved everything she got. Emma deserved it too. They all deserved it. The courtroom erupted in chaos as bailiffs rushed to restrain Gary. Judge Williams banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order, as Gary continued his explosive confession. I dealt with Emma permanently, just like I should have dealt with Sophia. Ungrateful daughters who don't know their place. Mr. Johnson, are you confessing to murdering Emma Patterson? She was going to destroy everything I built. I fixed the problem. By the time bailiffs had Gary restrained and removed from the courtroom, his spontaneous confession had sealed his fate on multiple charges, including Emma's murder. I sat in the witness gallery, holding Marcus's hand tightly, as the full scope of Gary's evil was finally exposed. After decades of lies and manipulation, the truth had emerged in the most dramatic way possible. Judge Williams called for an immediate recess to allow prosecutors to consult with homicide detectives about Gary's murder confession. As the courtroom slowly emptied, I realized that this nightmare was finally coming to an end. 3 weeks after Gary's courtroom confession, I stood before Judge Williams to deliver my victim impact statement. Gary had been found guilty on all counts assault with a deadly weapon, domestic violence, veterans benefits fraud, money laundering, and first-degree murder in Emma's death. Your Honor, for 28 years, I believed that the violence in our home was normal. I thought every daughter lived in fear of making her father angry. I thought love and terror were supposed to exist together. The courtroom was packed with supporters, including Crystal, Linda, Tommy, Marcus, Dr. Martinez, Janet Walsh, Detective Brooks, and dozens of domestic violence advocates who had rallied around our case. Gary Johnson stole more than money from taxpayers. He stole my sense of safety, my ability to trust my belief that family means protection rather than danger. But he couldn't steal my determination to survive and speak the truth. Gary sat motionless at the defense table, his earlier explosive behavior replaced by sullen silence. His confession had made a trial unnecessary, leading to a guilty plea arrangement that spared us further testimony. I want other survivors to know that speaking up is worth the cost. Justice is possible even when it feels impossible. No one deserves to live in fear of the people who claim to love them. Judge Williams thanked me for my courage and turned to address Gary directly. Mr. Johnson, your crimes represent a systematic pattern of violence manipulation and fraud spanning multiple decades. You have terrorized innocent people, stolen from taxpayers, and murdered a woman who sought to escape your abuse. The sentence was everything prosecutors had hoped for: life in prison, without the possibility of parole for Emma's murder, plus 25 years in federal prison for fraud. Gary would die behind bars, never again able to hurt anyone. After the sentencing, Crystal and I held hands as we walked down the courthouse steps. Surrounded by reporters and supporters, the little sister I never knew existed had become my closest ally and dearest friend. "How does it feel?" a reporter asked. "It feels like justice," Crystal replied simply, "and it feels like Emma can finally rest in peace." The months that followed were filled with healing and rebuilding. My brain injury symptoms gradually improved with continued treatment, though I still experienced occasional headaches and memory lapses. Dr. Jennifer Walsh helped me process the complex emotions of putting my father in prison while celebrating my freedom from abuse. Linda struggled initially with the collapse of her entire world, but she threw herself into volunteer work with domestic violence organizations and became a powerful advocate for other women trapped in abusive relationships. She moved into a small apartment near Tommy and me, rebuilding her life with remarkable courage. Tommy continued therapy to address his own trauma while finishing his degree in social work. He wanted to help other young men recognize and escape cycles of family violence. His recordings had been crucial evidence in the trial, and he felt proud of finally taking action to protect our family. Marcus and I postponed our wedding until I felt emotionally ready for such a significant commitment. He supported me through every difficult moment of the legal proceedings, proving that healthy love looks nothing like the toxic relationship dynamics I had grown up witnessing. The federal government returned most of the seized assets after Gary's conviction, allowing Linda to keep the house and restart her financial life. We discovered that Gary had hidden additional money in offshore accounts, which was donated to veterans organizations to help genuine combat survivors. 6 months after the sentencing, Crystal and I established the Emma Patterson Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors, focusing specifically on helping women with brain injuries caused by abuse. The foundation provided medical care, legal assistance, and housing support for survivors who needed comprehensive help rebuilding their lives. Dr. Martinez became our medical advisor, using his expertise to identify other victims of domestic violence who might be misdiagnosed as accident-prone. His research into the connection between brain injuries and family abuse led to new protocols at hospitals throughout Texas. Detective Brooks was promoted to sergeant and specialized in cold case domestic violence investigations. She reopened dozens of suspicious deaths involving women who had been labeled as accident victims, or suicides, using lessons learned from Emma's case to identify patterns of concealed murder. Marcus and I were finally married on a beautiful spring day, 2 years after Gary's conviction. Crystal walked me down the aisle, representing the family bonds we choose, rather than the ones we inherit. Linda and Tommy stood as witnesses, our small but mighty chosen family. The wedding was held in the garden of our new home, purchased with money I had earned through my accounting career rather than Gary's stolen benefits. Every dollar represented honest work and personal independence. During my recovery, I had returned to college to earn a master's degree in victim advocacy, inspired by Crystal's example and determined to help other survivors navigate the legal system. My brain injury had actually enhanced certain cognitive abilities, while impairing others, making me uniquely suited to help other trauma survivors with neurological complications. The foundation grew rapidly, serving hundreds of women throughout the Southwest and partnering with hospitals, police departments, and legal organizations to identify and assist domestic violence victims with brain injuries. We discovered that Gary's pattern of abuse was unfortunately common with many abusers, targeting the head specifically to cause cognitive impairment that would make their victims less credible witnesses. 3 years after Gary's conviction, I received a call from the prison warden, informing me that my father had died of a heart attack in his cell. I felt neither grief nor celebration, only a profound sense of closure. The man who had terrorized so many people was finally gone, unable to hurt anyone else. Crystal and I visited Emma's grave together, placing flowers and sharing memories of the sister and mother who had died trying to protect us. Her death had not been in vain. It had ultimately led to justice and the exposure of a criminal network that had operated for decades. Tommy graduated with honors and began working as a counselor at a residential facility for adolescent boys who had experienced family trauma. His own survival story became a powerful tool for helping other young men understand that violence is a choice, not an inevitability. Linda became a certified domestic violence counselor and worked closely with our foundation, using her experience as an enabler to help other family members recognize their role in perpetuating abuse. Her transformation from victim to advocate was remarkable to witness. Marcus was promoted to principal at his elementary school and implemented new protocols for identifying signs of child abuse and family violence. His gentle nature and emotional intelligence made him especially effective at helping traumatized children feel safe enough to disclose their experiences. My own healing journey included ongoing therapy, regular medical monitoring, and a commitment to speaking publicly about domestic violence and brain injury. I testified before state legislative committees about the need for improved training for medical personnel and law enforcement officers in recognizing patterns of family abuse. 5 years after the chair attack that changed everything I stood before, a packed auditorium at the University of Texas Medical School, addressing future doctors about the critical importance of looking beyond obvious explanations when treating suspicious injuries. When a patient tells you they're clumsy, ask more questions. When a family member offers elaborate explanations for simple accidents, investigate further. When someone's injury pattern doesn't match their story, trust your medical training over their narrative. The audience included Dr. Martinez, who had become a national expert on domestic violence identification in emergency medicine. His protocols had been adopted by hospitals throughout the country, leading to the identification and protection of thousands of additional victims. After my presentation, a young medical student approached me with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Sophia, your story helped me understand why my mother always had bruises. I'm going to call the domestic violence hotline tonight." These moments made every difficult step of my journey worthwhile. Gary's violence had been meant to silence and control me, but instead it had given me a powerful voice for change and justice. As I drove home that evening to Marcus and our infant daughter Emma Christina, named for the woman whose death had ultimately saved us all, I reflected on the profound truth I had learned through pain and healing. Family isn't about blood relations or maintaining appearances. Family is about safety support and unconditional love. It's about people who protect you rather than hurt you, who believe your truth rather than demand your silence, who celebrate your strength rather than exploit your vulnerabilities. The little girl I once was terrified and confused by her father's violence had grown into a woman capable of seeking justice and building something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. My brain injury had healed, my trauma had been processed, and my future stretched ahead bright with possibility. That night, as I tucked Emma Christina into her crib, I whispered the promise that Gary had never made and never kept. "Daddy and I will always keep you safe, little one. Always." The cycle of violence that had plagued multiple generations of women in Gary's orbit was finally broken. In its place, we had built something new, a legacy of truth healing and protection for those who need it most. If you're reading this and recognize yourself in my story, please know that you deserve better. You deserve safety, respect, and love without fear. Help is available, justice is possible, and healing is within your reach. You don't have to face this alone. Have you or someone you love ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal safety? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else find the courage to speak up. Please like this video if my experience resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of survival and healing, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that justice is possible. Thank you for listening to my journey and for supporting survivors everywhere. Remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more loved than you realize. Until next time, keep choosing hope over fear and truth over silence.